Hello, everybody. Welcome to the live stream. And I'm trying for the second time to do a simul stream between YouTube and Substack. So I will try to make eye contact with both screens, but thank you in advance for your patience. So today I want to speak about the film Lid, which, as the title says, is directed by Rami Younis and Sarah Emma Friedland. And it's a very fine film. And this is why I tell people whenever Palestinians are interviewed and they're asked what films should people be watching, stop what you're doing and just write things down. Because this was added to my list by one of those who were interviewed. And I think it was one of the cast for The Voice of Hin Rajab, who had said, you need to watch Lid, Arna's Children. And I'd written it down and I finally got to see Lid. Very fine film. And one that uses animation to imagine an alternate history for not just Palestine, but for Lid. And if you're unfamiliar with it, it's been called Al-Lid, Lida, throughout history. The occupiers call it Lod. And this alternate reality has the Arabs in general rejecting Sykes-Picot and creating something known as the Greater Levant, which includes Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, and they establish a country. And interestingly, in this alternative history, the Jews still come because there is still something that happens in Europe, which leads them to come, and they are welcomed as minorities in the land. So really interesting alternative history, but it's pursuing this fanciful alternative history to help you think about things, and it does it in this animated way, and then it brings you back to these very brutal realities over and over. We get to hear from several survivors of the Nakba, and hearing their stories, particularly this brutal expulsion. The first story we hear is from Issa Fanous, who is an artist who in the animated version is responsible for making this giant sculpture of St. George, sort of this patron saint of Lid. And for centuries, Christians would come for a holiday in Lid called Eid Lid, and it commemorated St. George. And Lid has been popular for centuries, and even in the recent times, in the 1940s, it had an international airport, it had a train station, so it was a significant city. And that's one of these things, as you dig a little deeper, if you learn more about Haifa, if you learn more about Accra, you will get to understand the deeper history, which the Israelis have tried to erase. And what's used is this beautiful overhead shot. There's a lot of drone footage in this film. I say that advisedly. Obviously, drones are used for great evil in the occupied territories, but here it's used for these beautiful shots. And in the center roundabout, this keeps getting used as a way to switch between these two realities. So Issa Fanous was 12 years old at the time of the Nakba. And after the massacre at the Damash mosque, he and other effectively children, I mean, 12 years old, you're still very much a child, they were taken there to remove the dead bodies because the Israelis couldn't be bothered to do that themselves. They'd went in there, they'd massacred these men, women, and children, as they did all throughout 1947 and 1948, and they still do to this present day. But they made them remove these bodies. Now, 2 or 3 days had passed, which meant these bodies were swelling, these bodies were bloated, because of the decomposition. Issa, you can see him describing, I mean, he's describing this, I think, in 2023, 2024 is when this film was made, and you can see him transported back. He said there were maggots. It was a horrific thing. And he went for 2 days with other boys to go and remove these bodies. And the third day he hid from the authorities. And he talks about his mom finding out about this and rubbing him all over with onions, worried that, he would catch a disease and he would die. Then we also hear Palmach veterans. So Palmach, the precursor of what is known today as the IDF, they talk about their accounts. And what's interesting, we have this sort of militant commander who is saying, we were so glad that they chose to depart so we didn't have to expel them. These are the things that he tells himself so he can sleep at night. He gathered the elders, I think, near the mosque and said, you have 3 hours to leave. and they left. And so he says, "Oh, I'm so glad we didn't have to expel them." He basically gave an expulsion order, and people responded to that. People didn't electively choose to say, "You know what? Today's a good day for me to abandon my house." So within 3 hours, they're asked to leave, and he says he sees them leaving, and he's in a sense overwhelmed by it, but he's overwhelmed by relief. He's not overwhelmed by sadness. We have many Israelis who testified. If you go back and watch 1948 Creation and Catastrophe, there are Israelis who testified to how sad they thought it was at the Nakba because it reminded them of their life back in Europe, of this sort of forced exile. But within that 3 hours, so imagine the expulsion order is given. Effectively, these people are leaving. Isa is told by his mom, "You need to go back and get some diapers." They don't really know when they're going to be able to come back, if they're going to be able to come back, and effectively he manages to convince a Palmach soldier somehow. They don't have a common language between them, but he signals. They then go back to the house together, and it turns out it's already occupied by a Bulgarian Jew who grabs an iron pipe and threatens the young boy. They can't now, one part of it is they can't make each other understood, and who knows, if that person would have reacted positively if he had said, "Look, I'm just here to get some diapers and then I'm going to go." But instead, people are already taking over someone else's house. It wasn't days, it wasn't weeks, it wasn't months. They moved into someone else's house within hours of the expulsion. That is such key testimony. And I'd read about it in other books before, but I'd never seen eyewitness testimony deliver it to give you such a short window of occupation. The occupation happened so quickly. Now, what else is interesting? So we have this Palmach commander giving this self-exculpatory view, like, "Oh, I'm so glad that they, chose to leave so we didn't have to expel them." But you have another one who you can see is somewhat moved by what has happened. And I'm not trying to give him any kind of credit other than him over the years recognizing what happened. And he says, I I went into the Palmach, not the Palmach Mosque, sorry, the Damash Mosque, and I saw men, women, and children unarmed, effectively. And he said they were injured. And he says this out loud. He says, "I don't know what they were injured from." What do you mean you don't know what you think they injured themselves? You think they fell they fell down the stairs that morning? They're injured because of your comrades shooting at them, killing them. And then he says there's another man in the yard of the mosque. He calls him a local person because you can't say the word Palestinian. We know that's illegal. A local person. And he said he told me in Yiddish, and he's so surprised that this Arab Palestinian spoke Yiddish. He said he told me in Yiddish, "Have mercy on me." And he said, I was so struck by that. And you can hear a voice from the back because this was being filmed for the Palmach Historical Archives. So this isn't really a pro-Palestinian group. You can hear a voice from the background jeering, saying, what are you, a pacifist now? And you can hear other people saying, shh, and you can see this guy's face just sorts of shuts down because he knows he can't really talk about however he feels, because he's with company now that if you say it wasn't great that we killed men, women, and children, that you're a pacifist, that you're a coward, that you're not a real Jew. That is normally the jeering that's going to happen from the right wing in Israel. That if you're not glad and you're not proud and you don't want to proclaim from the hilltops that you murdered men, women, and children in cold blood, then you're not a real Jew. You're a pacifist, whatever that means. That's sort of a great insult. What are you, a pacifist now? And you could see him sort of shut down. We don't see more of that exchange, but it was really, really fascinating. So that happens. And I think what's wonderful about the film, it manages to keep going between perspectives. So we hear from the Zionist mayor of Lid. Then we go back to Isa Fanous. We also hear from another, survivors of the Nakba, Mahasen Tartir, who, God rest her soul, I think she's passed on now. She was 7 years old during the Nakba. And she talks about the fact that the Israeli soldiers, as they were leaving, would frisk them to take their gold, to take their money. And there's over and over, there's no irony lost. That's why I point you back to 1948 Creation and Catastrophe. These stories are told there as well, that you want to tell us about how these things happen to you in Europe, and then you do them to other people in Palestine. And there's no dissonance there. It's perfectly permissible to rob people of their gold and their money after you've expelled them from their homes. This is the work of God's chosen people. So she tells us the story, and we see statistically that tens of thousands of Palestinians were expelled from Lid, and about 1,000 were left who were confined to a ghetto, confined to manual labor. You really couldn't make it up. You couldn't make it up if you didn't see it and hear it and read about it yourselves. But I would argue, for me, the most shocking part of the documentary, and probably the one that helped, uh, I'm not going to say the word change. It helped me continue to deepen and understand my view of Palestine and the Palestinians, is this teacher, Manar Al-Meme, wonderful lady, and the cameras follow her into one of her um, sessions for what looks to be a group of gifted kids. They're in some sort of gifted program, and it's clear that this wasn't rehearsed, because I think everyone is a bit surprised by the answers. She is asking children to talk about their identity. How do you see yourself? And she gives they have cutouts, like I like soccer, or I want to be an astronaut, or whatever else. And she asks, Palestine, what, what does this have to do when you think of it? The children, I would say, it's not clear, because there isn't a child that really raises his or her hand and really makes a case. But the majority of the classroom doesn't know where Palestine is. There's one of the children who literally says out loud, "I'm Israeli." And he says, it's one long ago I was my family was Palestinian, but now I'm Israeli. And his reasoning is, I'm born in Israel. So in my brain, and I think for many of you as well, maybe not many of you, maybe I'm the only one here who is thinking this, part of observing so many episodes of brave Palestinian resistance, we may have in our minds every Palestinian child is properly educated about the realities of the situation. Every Palestinian child has parents who had parents who had parents who went through all of this, and those stories have been passed down. And there's no way they would forget that. But I'm reminded of what David Ben Gurion said many years ago, and what you want to say about him, war criminal, murderer, all those things would be true. But he was a very able man. And one of the things that David Ben Gurion said was, the old will die and the young will forget. And this Palestinian child saying he is an Israeli, these Palestinian children who are in the gifted program saying that effectively they don't know where Palestine is. They said, oh, it's in Saudi Arabia and Lebanon, and the teacher's confused. You can see it. That's why I say it's not scripted. She says, so it's in all these places. One of them said it's in South Asia. So these Palestinian children who are in the so-called gifted program in Lid, in this particular class, and I'm not saying that's all the kids in Lid, I'm just looking at this tiny little sample size. It's a reminder to us that we can't expect everyone to be perfect. Mohammed Al-Kurd talks about this in Perfect Victims, that we can't expect the Palestinians to be perfect victims. I think it also is on the other side. We can't expect them to be perfect Palestinians. The idea that I would, quote unquote, get mad or say that these people aren't real Palestinians, that's not my reaction. My reaction is simply one of shock. I cannot believe that there are Palestinian children being raised who are not being told the truth about what happened by their parents. That is the primary job. It's not the primary job of the teacher. The teachers are there to help parents educate the children. The primary job of education for all of history, from now until the end of time, is the parents. The parents are the primary teachers of the children. And somehow these children were raised without being told, where is Palestine? What happened to us? What is this thing called Israel? Why would you never call yourself an Israeli ever? That it doesn't matter, that you were, quote unquote, born in Israel, whatever that means. And that Palestine exists because the people exist, and that one day the borders will be fixed. But that was really shocking. And the camera cuts to her as the kids have left, and she's crying, in part because she's thinking, how is this possible? What's the future going to be like? Because she has been properly taught. She has been taught by her parents and her parents' parents about what really happened. So that's all I'm saying. I'm not trying to beat up on these Palestinian kids. I'm not trying to say that their parents are terrible parents. I'm just expressing shock and admitting, just as we cannot reasonably expect Palestinians to be perfect victims, as Mohammed Al Kurd, I think, articulately makes the case in his wonderful book, which if you haven't read, you should read. We can't expect them to be perfect Palestinians either, and it just shows you that ignorance, that inability to teach your children properly, it cuts across all cultures. Everyone can fail in their job as parents in properly conveying this. I don't blame this on the children. I blame the parents. How can you raise your children in Palestine and not tell them where Palestine is and what the relationship is of Palestine to the Israelis? I don't know how that's possible, but these children were raised that way. And if there were some here, there are certainly some elsewhere. I don't think it's the majority of the Palestinian people. I don't even know if it's a micro minority of the Palestinian people. But it's just a reminder to us the importance of education, that even some young Palestinian children are not being given the real story, which means the rest of us, might also not be getting the real story. So do your best to educate yourself in every way possible. Lid, it's maybe an hour and 20 minutes, I want to say. Well worth your time. I got it on streaming. I bought it on streaming so I could watch it. You'd have to look where in your country it's possible to watch, but it's a very fine film. I would say probably one of the top 10. And this was, I think, film number 40 or film number 41. So I've seen quite a few films on Palestine by now, but I would put it in my top 10. It's definitely worth seeing. Beautiful music, beautifully shot, wonderful concept of thinking about what if Palestine wasn't what if things had gone a different way, and then clashing those two realities together. I think it's beautifully done. So I don't see any other questions. If there are no questions, if you have comments after the live stream, please feel free to put them in the comments. Would love to talk to you more and hear what your thoughts are. Or if you have a chance to watch Lid yourself, I would love to hear what you think. So let's keep the conversation going in the comments. Thanks for stopping by the live stream, and I will see you on the next live stream.